Happy at work? Cindy Wahler is a psychologist, author, and leadership expert, and joins us this morning to talk about figuring out how to find joy in your work, whether from home or office. Dr. Wahler, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
One thing we have figured out on this program, because we have a text line where our listeners take part, negativity is a challenge. Overcoming negativity is a challenge for many people during this pandemic. Do you find the same thing?
Absolutely. And for purposes of example, let me just sort of explain the context. If we look at the population divided into two groups, there are those who play not to lose. And when you play not to lose, that means you set up your life in a very predictable way. It's organized, it's planful, and you can really take comfort in predictability. There are those who play to win. And when you play to win, then you set up risk because you're going to fall, you're going to fail, but the gains are much higher. And so, therefore, that in part dictates our level of happiness, what our expectations are. And when things go wrong or are unpredicted, like the global pandemic, then that also affects how we perceive the world and how we control the world.
Dr. Wahler, how much of it has to do with our family of origin and the way our parents would react to these events in life?
That's a great question. A lot has to do with how we are raised and our emotional resilience. So if we're taught that realistically that there will be obstacles, that there will be stumbling blocks, that things won't be perfect, that not everything is in your control, and that failure is actually builds you up to be a more resilient person, then you have more realistic expectations. If you grow up in a world where you are considered entitled, gifted, special, privileged, then you do believe that you have special honors and privileges and resources, which in fact the reality of the world doesn't work that way. And so then you're disappointed, and your expectations are set in a way that creates a level of perfection you're never going to achieve.
When you talk about emotional resilience, and the example you gave was perfect, but what about little children? Are some children born with more resilience than other children?
I think it has a lot to do with their childhood influences, the messages that were given, as opposed to how we enter into the world. So part of it is, I think we come in as a blank slate, and then how we're parented around a sense of optimism, a sense of having a glass half full versus half empty makes a difference.
So when it comes to the great resignation of 2022 and the way different groups are reacting to the pandemic, I would say that you have probably not been the least bit surprised by all of the data that we're coming in contact with, right, Dr. Wahler?
Absolutely, and I love it because it is the silver lining to the pandemic. It's caused everybody to step back and self-examine what is important to you, and what is important to you should be what your values are. So what do you value in your workplace, in life, and are you getting that kind of reward or recognition? And if you are, that's terrific, and if you're not, then you need to regroup and figure out how do you spend your time in a role, with a job, with a boss, or in your personal time that's going to give you that satisfaction or that kind of recognition.
Dr. Wahler, I know you've written a book called 20 Effective Habits for Mastery at Work, but let's talk about habits. What is your advice for how to create and sustain a new habit, something we want to add to our life?
So the best piece of advice that I can give is that it's very important for us to be agile and adapt. So as soon as you think you've got things figured out, it's likely time for change. And so the habit needs is that you have a fluid approach to life, that things are not going to stay the same. And when you don't have that expectation, it then allows you to pivot and then create something new for yourself. And then, as I said at the very beginning, take some risks, engage in something that's new, and at a minimum, you then have experienced something else, and you become more interesting because you've got lots to talk about and other different experiences.
Dr. Wahler's website is cindywahler.com. It's linked on our Facebook page. When it comes to employers, Dr. Wahler, they are doing everything they can to keep their fingers in the dike to keep, holding back the waters. Why should they still be thinking about their employees' happiness at this point?
It's all pervasive and all very important, because if you are not a happy employee, you are disengaged, you are not motivated, you're not producing, and at worst, you're voting with your feet. And so I'm called upon in the past year and a half during COVID to offer up all kinds of employee engagement programs as a way of keeping employees motivated and feeling valued and feeling instrumental and contributing to the organization. If organizations that don't prioritize this, then likely are going to have trouble mitigating the risk and also have trouble in terms of succession planning and talent planning.
Can you give us an example of that for an employer to keep an employee engaged and happy?
Absolutely. So here's what I think organizations historically have done well. Organizations conduct exit interviews. What they really should be doing is conducting stay interviews. So an exit interview is too late. Am I, as an employee, going to be honest and tell you why I'm leaving? That maybe I don't like my boss, I can't stand my colleague, my coworker, hate my job? Or am I going to already now be geared towards my next role? If you engage in a stay interview, then your boss, your manager, is talking to you about, are you getting enough creativity in your role? Do you feel that you're getting enough recognition? Are you empowered? Do you want to lead people? Do you want a bigger mandate? And by doing that, then that organization is taking a very proactive role in that employee's current state as well as their future aspirations.
Can you apply this to our personal lives when you talk about the stay interview? You're a therapist, right?
I love this question.
I mean, by the time
and so yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. So in terms of our personal lives, you should be talking to your partner, your spouse, your friends, and reevaluating that. Are you getting the respect that you need? Are you getting the amount of time, the engagement, the interaction? And if you are, fantastic. And if you're not, then you need to have a transparent and direct conversation with that important person in your life or important people in your life to rejig, because we change and we have different expectations and we evolve, and what we want from our personal family relationships also shift.
But Dr. Wahler, change is so difficult.
We don't like to change. we don't like to change.
I don't like it either. I don't like it either, and I profess exactly that we need to change. You're right. So there's resistance to it, but I think if you put energy in moving forward, you do find that, in fact, it's way more rewarding than holding back, because the world goes ahead without you if you push back and hold back.
Okay, so let's say we're open to change and we have a bad habit that we would like to jettison from our life, either at work or at home. How can we do that?
So let's just use a specific example. Let's say the bad habit is something where you're constantly interrupting somebody and you're not an active listener, and so the person sees you as rude or disrespectful or demeaning. So what I would do is I would say, okay, find someone that you trust who's going to be direct and transparent, and have them call you out on it, because it's very hard to see it in yourself. If you're a passionate, energetic person, you may not be necessarily conscious that you're interrupting someone. So get your best friend or get your coworker to call you out just in time, give you that feedback, and so that you become more aware and that you work on it together, almost like a buddy.
Speaking of feedback, which I think we all need, because how do we know how we're doing in life unless we get feedback? But now you mentioned find your best friend. Okay, so that's a safe zone. We know we're safe there. How can one give feedback so that it will be heard and the receiver will not get defensive? How can we give effective, constructive feedback that won't be looked at as criticism?
You're making me work hard. I really love these questions. Thank you for this. So what you do need to do is probably not ask your usual cast of characters. Go to, let's say, your coworkers and your colleagues and say, I need to work on some things. I want to become a better manager, better boss, better leader. And I need you to give me the feedback, but I want it to be done in a way that A, is constructive, B, is respectful, and grounded in some examples. So if someone says, so and so, Wendy's always so emotional and so reactive, that doesn't help. That feels hurtful. But if it is around here, when you were in this meeting and you lost your objectivity, let me give you an example. You moved away from the facts and talked more ambiguously. This is how I would reposition it so that it's done in a constructive way and you're equipping the person with some strategies and tools.
I think we need to talk to you around Valentine's Day, Dr.
Oh,
Wahler.
absolutely.
You're on. You're welcome. I look forward to it.
Thank you so much. And also, I like your accent.
Thank you. I like yours too.
That's Dr. Cindy Wahler. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.